Hey everyone, and welcome. My name is Robin Dreeke, the founder and CEO of People Formula, a leadership and communication strategies company, as well as a retired head of the FBI Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysis Program. And I'm also your host of the People Formula video podcast, where I interview unusual and amazing individuals that have mastered the skill set of building connections and building strong, healthy relationships based upon trust. Today, my guest is Keith Kall. I'm going to go into Keith's bio here in a second when he comes on the show, but I really wanted to set this up as one of the most amazing individuals I've ever met, and that's because without title, position, or any legitimate connections to government organizations or institutions, Keith was able to initiate and build trust and connections with individuals in Afghanistan during the 2021 withdrawal in August. Keith was able to exfiltrate not just one, but up to 40 people, and still going strong, individuals that were being targeted by the Taliban after the United States began withdrawing and even after the withdrawal. Keith did all this remotely from his home here in the United States as a side thing, not even his main job or business. And he felt compelled to help out his fellow man. And this is his story about how he did exactly that. So sit back, relax, and take a lot of notes on this most amazing human being that literally has saved lives building trust. Thank you for doing this. It was a good warm up. And it's a real shame. I was listening, when I listened to it, I pulled it up and my wife's sitting next to me. The audio was great. The content was fantastic. And I can only hope I can capture what we chatted about last time. And for full disclosure to the audience listening right now, this is take two. Because your humble host, Robin here, when I recorded it, it only captured Keith talking, and which is great. That's what we want. But I sounded like this voice from beyond. And literally what I was going to do, if you were unable to re-record, I was just going to put a graphics of us both when we spoke and then just have nice little slides. So if that happens again, that's exactly what I'm doing.
Okay.
Anyway, with that, I'm going to do a quick intro. And for those that are watching, I'm going to give you a quick teaser right now, because this is probably one of the best, most interesting conversations. And I know Joe Navarro's conversation I had was really popular, but I think everyone's going to get even more out of this because Keith is the ultimate humble, humility-based human being I've met. And yet this humility has literally saved lives. I mean, way beyond anything I've ever done and be witness to in my entire life. It's truly amazing. So, and this, especially in this past year, we've all seen, I don't think there's a part of the world that hasn't seen and experienced what happened in Afghanistan with the pullout of the U.S. there. And Keith was at the forefront by his own initiative and saved lives because he knew how to connect. He knew how to overcome skepticism and build healthy, strong trust and relationships with everyone, because it took a village, and Keith knew how to create that village. Anyway, over the last 20 years, Keith Kall has led a career negotiating, building, and leading multi-million-dollar strategic partnerships in the United States, Europe, Asian, Latin America, and Sub-Saharan Africa in corporate and humanitarian sector organizations. His professional pursuit to build long-lasting, impactful partnerships has taken him everywhere, from some of the world's most well-known corporate headquarters to some of the world's most impoverished communities, all in an effort to bring together organizations and individuals to achieve something bigger than they could ever do independently. No kidding. Prior to strategic partnership development work, Keith taught at business communications at College of Foreign Trade in Budapest, Hungary, the University of La Coruna in La Coruna, Spain, and Thunderbird, the American School of International Management in Glendale, Arizona. And as I said at the intro last time on take one, I always said that the toughest sales job in the world was recruiting spies for the FBI because no one wants to buy my product of American patriotism. It's illegal for me to actually have a cold call because of treaties and laws. But Keith's work internationally on his own initiative, not because he had a job or anything or anyone to do it, but his own compulsive desire to save the world was remarkable. With that, welcome back again, Keith, and your willingness to chat. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be back.
Yeah. So, with that, I gave you that intro. I wish I could even do you more just than that. So, Keith, if you could, tell us about your journey. Like, how did you get to do and be this human being? And then what got you into this really unusual way to be a humanitarian?
Um, so, I'll take it back in terms of a little bit of storytelling. I recently read an article in the Wall Street Journal about this Nigerian hostage negotiator. He was this rural school teacher, and he just found himself through a variety of circumstances as the kidnapping and ransom is a huge business in Nigeria. And in this highly rural village, he became the go-to guy that anytime anybody had a family member that was kidnapped, um, he would be the guy people would call, and he became this kind of de facto with no training, just kind of learned the job as he was going along, hostage negotiator. And when I read the story, it just felt very familiar to me because, sometimes you choose the job and sometimes the job chooses you. And I would say throughout my career, to a certain degree, the job chose me. And definitely what happened in Afghanistan, I mean, was no intention of mine. Be careful taking that first step because you never know where it's going to lead. We never know where you're going to end up, but it wasn't my intention. But the opportunity definitely chose me.
So Keith, it's a great way to kind of intro, I think, for anyone in life. I'm often asked the same thing, it's like, how did you get to be the behavioral analysis program head and all that? And it was the job chose me because that was not what my path was. It's not what I set out to do. What did you set out to do before you became this great humanitarian entrepreneur, I guess is the way I'll phrase it?
No, so I just had a strange calling. I mean, my father was a stockbroker. He had his own firm. That wasn't something that I really wanted to do. And I've always just been very interested in helping people. And I just can't stop it. I mean, every dog and cat we've ever had in our household has always been a stray dog. So we've always taken in strays. If people are run out of gas on the side of the road, I'll pull over. If people are run out, if they have a flat tire, I'll pull over and help them fix their tire. It's just been an ongoing thing. It's just been one of those common threads throughout my life to constantly do that. And so I think it extrapolated into, granted, in some way, I think it's kind of an offset. You gave me a really kind introduction that I don't feel worthy of. And maybe in many ways, I leave a lot of destruction behind me too. So hopefully I'm cleaning up some of, people are coming behind me and cleaning up my mess as well.
Well, because it always takes a village. And you had mentioned, all these little, milestones along the way. Was there any one event that kind of led you to what you wound up doing in Afghanistan? Like how'd that all happen?
It didn't. So there wasn't really any event. It was just, again, I think it was just kind of an extrapolation of how I was, and I feel called to lead my life. I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Christ, and I believe you're supposed to love thy neighbor, and do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so to be consistent with that and to really live according to that code, it all kind of just fell into place. And professionally, I would bounce around the world. I lived in 3 different countries, wasn't in any place longer than 2 years up to my 40s. I think just collecting experience and kind of collecting arrows from my quiver. And then when I started doing the work in partnerships full time, what I mean by full time is a really strong focus on it. All those experiences and opportunities all came into play.
So go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to pivot to the situation in Afghanistan. I mean, that started with a phone call.
And before we get to that, one of the most common questions I get asked is, when you are as giving as you are, and, my motto, one of my pillars for the values of my company, as well as myself, is being an available resource for the success and prosperity of others without that expectation of reciprocity. Be a giver. One of my questions I get asked frequently is, when is that too much? When do you have your limit? When do you get so exhausted from the ask that you stop? What's yours? Do you have a limit? And if not, or if you do, what is it?
a tough one. I don't think I've ever reached that. I don't think I've ever been in a situation where that limit was called into question. I mean, the situation in Afghanistan definitely pushed me. I was pretty, thread worn by the very end of it, from the standpoint that it went on so long. I mean, we just completed 6 months last Sunday. So a week ago Sunday, it had been 6 months since the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban and the evacuation of the United States. And so that was the only situation. But again, that was self-motivated. No, I don't think anybody, I mean, it's almost impossible for anybody to take advantage of you unless you let them. And
Right.
If there's a certain point where there's not an appreciation for something and there's not some spirit of reciprocity, I'm not looking for one necessarily, but at least some co-investment of minimal resources, I guess, then I'm happy to help anybody. But if it's just take, that's not a relationship and that's not a partnership, and I'm not really interested in those things, but even up until that point where I get to that point where I make that realization and I have given a lot, I don't have any regrets about what I did previously.
Sure.
You just live and you learn. It's experience. It's another experience I just kind of file away for future reference, and hopefully I come out a better person as a result of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always say, for everyone, because everyone's tank has a different level. And I always say, if you get to the point where you start having resentment for the actions you're taking, that's when you're at your limit, because resentment starts building an unhealthy relationship. And it's no longer being rewarding to you to be a giver and to be and to take care of others and be that resource for others. And everyone's limit on that is different. And you hit some keys right there. You don't have an expectation of reciprocity, but feeling that someone is valuing what you're doing and having gratitude is an amazing feeling of completeness. It actually gives us that energy to keep going. And that's why I find, this kind of approach to life and leadership to be a self-fulfilling kind of methodology, because you're doing it for others and you're being generous and you're taken care of. But at the same time, the reward you're getting from feeling gratitude and being valued is the energy you have to keep feeding that loop. So and that's what true inspirational leadership is. That's what the exceptional people do.
That's, I agree with that 100%. And oftentimes when I engage in these types of opportunities or partnerships, or where I find myself helping someone, I start with the end and then I work back.
Yes.
And that's actually, and so I kind of know where the end of this engagement is. And then I work backwards in terms of how do I get to that successful end. In many ways, that's how I planned out, at least in my head, this whole evacuation and kind of exfiltration out of Afghanistan for this woman, and then 17 other families.
And that's, so I always call it the ends goals is what you focus on first, and the means fall into place along the way. And
Absolutely.
kind of quote Simon Sinek's, from his book, start with why. Basically, you define the why, which is the end state, and the what and the how fall into place because the destination you're walking to. With that intro, let's do it. Tell us about how this first one started, what you did, how you did it, and the challenge. What I really love to hear is how you built trust remotely, built these connections with strangers. I mean, that's what's ridiculous. Strangers that were literally putting their lives in your hands to save their lives. How did it start?
So it started on August 24th. I mean, it's one of those events in life you remember where you were when. It was the space shuttle, the catastrophe of the space shuttle, to 9/11, to this circumstance. And it was just very clear on where I was at the moment when this whole situation began. I was driving down the freeway down here in California. I was listening to the reports of just the chaos in Afghanistan, and then I remembered that I knew somebody who was working there. So I called a buddy of mine who knew her directly, and I asked if she was okay and if she was still in the country and if she had means to get out. And he said, yeah, she's fine. That she was actually out of the country on home leave, and so she was safe and sound with her family. Then he brought up, he goes, but there's this other woman who we will call M, because she still has family in Afghanistan. So we got to be careful about.
Yeah, and also for everyone listening, also realize that this is ongoing, and we're the fact that Keith actually was willing to come on and share this story, as he is literally still saving lives and exfiltrating them from Afghanistan. So we're protecting names of the innocent and those we're trying to save. So anyway, Keith, go ahead.
So the one thing I want to make really clear, it's a whole team of people. It's not me. It's a whole team of people. And the other thing is that there have been so many other groups and so many people that have done things that have been far greater. Mine is just one small story in a mosaic of just this really big humanitarian effort to help people get out of Afghanistan, which was an incredibly dangerous situation for so many people. And the beauty of it is that everybody that I know that was working on it and has continued to work on it, it's a second job, or sometimes it's their third or fourth job. That no one that I was in contact was doing it professionally. Myself, I did it 100% as a private citizen. It was not under the auspices of any organization or any coordinated effort. But it just became this growth of this huge, for lack of a better term, kind of underground network of people trying to help people who are at grave risk get out of Afghanistan. So I called my friend to ask about this one woman, and he brought up this other woman. She was a human rights activist, particularly an advocate for women. She had a large social media presence. She worked for a U.S. organization at that time. And so she checked off a lot she worked in a very dangerous area of Afghanistan that was still populated by the Taliban. The Taliban have been there for decades. And so this was a Taliban area. So she was well known to the Taliban. And when the U.S. decided to pull out, they came around with her picture, started knocking on doors. And so she was moving from house to house to house to house. It became clear that this woman had no one to help her. And so I wanted to see if there was something that I could do to help. I mean, how I started out with kind of my mindset around helping her, I thought I was beginning. It's kind of the job chooses you. It was far different than I found myself in 2 to 3 days later. It's definitely a different scenario and context. I called up one woman who knew her and another woman who had met her once, because I figured I needed at least a small team to help me with this.
Right.
I have a tendency to be, not always the warmest person in the world and somewhat kind of direct. And I wanted other people to kind of come around, be very encouraging, and just to her have different voices and to feel that there was a team of people working on her behalf.
Basically, you know what psychological comfort you're able to provide and not able to provide because of who you are. It's an amazing amount of humility and self-awareness to know that, and when we were in the FBI, we told case agents all the time, you might not be the right person to do the interview, to do the contact, and that would bruise some egos sometimes. But at the bottom line is, what's your end state, what's your why. So good on you for having that awareness as well.
So that was the 24th. We had our first conversation that day. This woman I made a connection with her. And again, this was all done on an end-to-end encrypted messaging service. So none of this was done via phone call or anything else. It was all done via text. So that was a different modality that I was not quite, I should say, it was a modality I never relied upon so heavily and had to be so careful with my words.
And so what's really amazing about that is one of the other questions I get asked all the time is, hey, in this new world, can you really form trust just in a text message? I guess you can. If you have to, yes, you can. So keep going.
So what I did was I talked to her, and then I had two friends. One was a former private military contractor who had worked in Afghanistan, and one was a former, he had worked for the NSA. And so I told her, look, I'll try to get you some options. There's a lot of flights going out. I'll see what I do if I can get you a seat on one of these planes. And so my two friends put me in contact with another group of people. And then I started building this entire network. So it was really interesting in terms of building trust. Not only did I have to build trust with her, I mean, I have no resources. I don't have a plane. I was like the least likely person for this opportunity from the standpoint that I'm not military. Don't work for the government. never been to Afghanistan, and certainly never led any kind of rescue or evacuation effort in my life. But what I did believe that I have and had a demonstrated ability to do, at least professionally, never in a circumstance like this, but to build networks, to build relationships, and to build partnerships. And so I relied on many of the same kind of human interaction skills to engage people.
What would you say was your most beneficial one that you used throughout this? Was there a common denominator that you think you use?
Definitely for the network. So I'll call it, for the evacuation network. I tried to, this is how I try to perform professionally as well. I tried to outgive people. And so, I mean, everybody was sharing information, and I was getting some really good contacts. So one contact led to two contacts led to four. And without saying, about 9 hours, I had private military contractors, I had NSA, I mean, people active NSA, I had a couple special forces contacts, I had a couple Air Force contacts. I had contacts everywhere that had just amazing caches of information. And the one thing I would ask them, I go, can I share this within the network? They would say, if you trust that person, yes, you can share it. So when anybody would give me information, I would share information back. And the second that I had any type of information that I felt was really valuable, I would share it with my whole entire network. And some people said it was incredibly valuable. And so this, I think when you help people, they want to help you back.
Right.
Be the friend that you want to have. And I was getting amazing amounts of information that really led and changed kind of how we thought about the whole evacuation of them. I mean, I was getting secret passcodes that you could flash at the gate, at the North Gate or Abbey Gate, as you're trying to get on the tarmac. And if you flash this code, they would actually let you through the gate.
And all this because you outgave people in information.
And it was, I think, just the quality of the people that were doing this. I think everybody was really focused on the same thing. There was I won't say everybody was great. There's some shady people.
Sure.
Some people have been highly criticized in terms of how they engage, but I would say even those people, there's one, group in particular that got a lot of criticism early on in the evacuation of people out of Afghanistan. They were incredibly helpful to me. And so I think everybody played a role. There were some people that were a little bit dodgy, but for the most part, there was just huge groundswell of people wanting to help other people get out. Based on allegiances and kind of codes of trust and rapport that had been built over the last some odd years of fighting Afghanistan, and so the last 20 plus years. And so it was an amazing human endeavor. I mean, I had really a kind of a dim view on humanity going into that for kind of where we were in the world, and it really changed my view, because you just see all these people acting privately to help and save lives of other people, and mostly people they didn't know.
All right. So keep going with the story of M.
Okay, so August 26th, I'm trying to get different options, and I got like 11 different seats for her on flights. And groups were saying, look, we can get her on this plane. I would tell them her story. They're like, no problem, we can get her on this plane, we can get her on this plane. The problem is it felt like half the country wanted to leave Afghanistan. And so around the airport, you have, roughly 50,000 people that are camping. I mean, there's like encampments around the airport. There were multiple checkpoints. So my conundrum always, or the code I had to break, was how to get her to a gate. I was confident if I get her to a gate, I could get her through. But to get her to the gate was the biggest challenge. And so we were looking at it. There was teams of private military contractors going around the city. And so I actually had a few commitments that, we can pick her up once she arrives in Kabul. She was 22 hours outside of Kabul.
And I apologize for interrupting, Keith. I'm curious, were these people doing this pro bono gratis? I mean,
Yep.
Or that's what is truly amazing about this as well. I mean, these are private companies and private organizations that generally work for fee, and yet they were all pitching in. That's amazing.
I mean, people were doing amazing. I mean, they had donors behind them. I mean, people were putting their lives at risk.
Yeah.
Pineapple Express came from the United States, were running around the city. I mean, they were putting their lives at risk. I mean, it was amazing groups. I mean, Save Our Allies, Allied Airlift 21. I mean, there was all these groups out there doing Task Force Argo. There's all these groups just doing amazing work. So we had all these different seats on her, but I constantly had to find the situation to get her. So when she arrived in Kabul, to be able to get her to a gate, that was the biggest challenge. And the situation was so fluid and was really, I mean, it was a dynamic environment that was changing hourly. And so I would have these commitments to pick her up, and they're like, I'm sorry, things changed. We can't do it anymore. And so, and then I got a piece of information on the 26th that changed the whole board. That they said the State Department is now pulling out on the 29th, not the 31st. And so our time frame, now we just lost 3 days. So now we were faced with the situation of what to do with her. There was no way she was getting out where she was. She was really, really far out of Kabul. There was really no way for her out of that city or that region. And so we all talked and we all agreed. You know, I wanted to get advice from other people. So my other 2 teammates that were working with me on this, we talked about it. We all agreed that she needs to move. And so we put her on a 22-hour bus ride to Kabul without any plan. And that's when I was in it. I mean, that's when the thing had really shifted. Now I own this mess. At least that's how I felt personally. I felt,
Sure.
Okay, in for a penny, in for a pound. Now we're deep into it. I mean, really, because the fuse is lit. Because no one knew what was going to happen after the 31st. And now the 31st is the 29th.
And were you in direct contact with her at this point too?
Yeah, the whole time. Yeah, the whole time. And so I was constantly giving her options. I think that's, you know, you asked about what were the things that played a big role in terms of building trust. With her, I think initially was giving her options. It had to be her decision. At every decision point, I would never decide, so you need to do this or you need to do that. I would say it's your decision. This is what I can offer. It's your decision. It was her life. It was her future. The decision had to be hers. I mean, she had to own it. She had to be fully invested because I knew what was coming was going to get harder and harder.
Right.
And this is, we were talking about, I believe you call them end goals, right?
Yep.
I knew what the end goal was, and I knew that road between A and Z was going to be very, very hard.
The means goals were going to be rough.
Yeah. I think the pivotal moment came actually on the bus ride. She said, you know, I decided to accept this plan, so I'll see it through to the end. Because as she's on the bus ride, then I'm going through all these different options. Again, I run into the same problem in Kabul. And then one of my teammates, she's like, I know this other guy, he works for a global risk company. He says they're working on something. So she put me in contact with him. He put me in contact with one of his colleagues who I'll call L. And she walked out this plan for me. And this plan was like was right for all the wrong reasons. I mean, everything you could say, this is not what we want to do, was that plan, but it really made sense. And so what it was to leave out of a smaller city. They were going to take a flight out of a smaller city. The whole world's eyes were on Kabul.
Right.
And they were going to actually fly a plane out of a smaller city. And it was a smaller city that was in the heart of now Taliban-controlled territory. That was very, very active and brazen Taliban-controlled area. So it did not, so we were going into the heart of the Taliban rather than driving away from it.
Right.
It didn't make any sense, but it just felt right. And with the network that I had built, I was using them as advisors as well. I ran across a few special forces operatives that I knew now, and they said, you know what, if this was my plan, I'd go for it. And so I walked it out with Em, and I told her, look, it's going to get scary. You're going to deal with some really scary people at the end of this, but they're there to help. Everybody is in on the joke. What
made it feel, you said you felt right. What do you think it was that made it feel right? I love trying to pick apart, these our sixth sense, our spider sense, because it's actually things that we're seeing and picking up on. What do you think it was?
Well, everybody was a co-investor in the success of this operation. Even
Sure.
The bad guys were invested in a positive outcome.
Right.
I didn't know the full story behind it, but I will say Elle and her team, they were at first, when they gave me kind of the 10,000 foot level, I was not feeling it at all. But then actually one of our colleagues chimed in and gave me really deep detail on it. And then I liked it.
Right.
For a variety of reasons, I can't go into some of the details, but I would say everybody knew what was going on.
Right.
So the surprises were minimal. I would say this had about an 80% chance of predictability.
So basically, you had a lot of open transparency, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of good information.
Right.
I felt I knew what the risks were.
Good.
And quite honestly, and the thing that I liked about it is it was a lower level in terms of tension. The tension was a lot less in this city because everybody is focused on Kabul. Everybody is going down into Kabul. And so, I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. I just think it's an amazing human story. And it's, like in the Return of the King, when they're trying to get Frodo into Sauron to destroy the ring, they decide to attack the gate.
Right.
So everybody's attention's at the front gate, so he can actually walk into the depths of Mordor and destroy the ring. It felt
the great
like
eye.
Yeah.
The great eye was in the wrong spot.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what it felt like. It felt like everybody's attention was looking the wrong direction, and this what made it easy to slip in and slip out.
Good.
So I think that was it, and it just. I mean, I'm a follower of Christ. I believe there was divine intervention. When I looked at it on paper, it's kind of like, to your point, it was funny because I'm like, this is like a really dangerous situation, but I felt great peace about it. And I just had zero doubt. I'm like, this is the plan. And I was looking at 4 or 5 different plans on my desk. I mean, my whole wall had become a war room, or my office become a war room. And so I had all these different plans. And this one that did not make sense was the one that I was like, this is it. And so we went with that. I explained it to her. And that's when she said she accepted it. And that's when she said, I decided to accept this plan, so I'll see it through to the end. And so then we had a plan. Right. And that was good. But the plan was dangerous. And in our conversations, in building rapport and building trust, I was kind of preparing her for, I think, the hardest part. So I think not only giving her options, but also I think the whole issue of being predictable played a strong role in terms of our building trust together.
Sure.
I find that predictability is key. I mean, that's the one thing that I love in your books, that you write about that in terms of you actually don't talk about trust. You talk about trust for you is defined by predictability. And that was such a fascinating way to look at it.
Yeah. And I literally, I did another podcast recently too, and they were going to talk about trust. And so I re-looked up the definition of trust that, like Webster's has, and it's not how I look at it. It's interesting. To your point, I see trust a lot of people tie morals and ethics to trust and liking and think, all these emotional subjective responses. But I think trust is, for me, is more of an objective predictability, because, trust is, can I trust something's going to happen a certain way? And that comes from, like you're saying, it comes from transparency and predictability. So we can actually have the information that we need to make healthy decisions and choices to move forward through whatever challenges we're facing. And it comes through that predictability. Absolutely.
So that is, I mean, I love how you put it that way, but you put it in a much more positive spin. I mean, any cross-functional team that I've worked with when building professionally and building strategic partnerships, I say rule number one always is never surprise our partner.
Yes.
If we're doing our job right, and that which is predictability, is that if you're not surprising them, then you're being predictable. I said, under no circumstances can we ever surprise them. If we know about a problem, they hear it from us as soon as we know about it. So when they ask, when did you know about that problem? I just can say, 2 hours ago, 5 hours ago, 10 hours ago. It's such a critical element in the area of building trust and building partnerships, is that you have to be predictable. Surprise is the worst thing, because then they begin to wonder what else is out there. It's the difference between playing, kind of an open hand poker versus, closed hand poker, is that they don't have to wonder what cards you're holding if you're being really open and being predictable and being transparent.
Yeah, I would end every conversation I had, especially with a new contact I would make, was my last thing I'd always say is, please ask me any questions you have whatsoever, because if I leave this encounter with you and you say to yourself, I wonder what he really wanted, I have totally failed you, because that means I'm leaving you with a sense of distrust in some way. So absolutely, that is so important.
And I think it's the issue of congruence. And so as well, as I think that plays into the whole issue of predictability. Right. I read when I was teaching communications in the universities, I read this article by this couple called Harmon and Harmon. I actually tried to find the article last week, but I couldn't find it. But I remember it pretty vividly. So they have like the 7 C's of communication. There's a lot of those articles out there, but Harman was the only one that had mentioned congruence.
Right.
And I find, at least in tech, specifically with M, congruence, I think, played a very, very big role. Because the familiarity built comfort, and the comfort built trust. She always knew when we engaged, she always knew kind of what I was giving her updates on where we were, what was working, what wasn't working. And I also always told her what I didn't know. So, look, this is what I know, and this is what I don't know, but we're getting answers to those. And so with every information set, with every answer came obviously a list of new questions. And I also always ended with the same phrase. I said, I validated her. I said, you can do this. Just be cool and stay smart. And she said she really relied on that phrase more and more and more. And it was congruent throughout the whole thing that I was always empowering her. Self-empowerment, I think, was critical to that. Because if she did not feel that she had agency, and as things got harder, she needed to see herself as completely capable and independent. Again, I think that's another area where the options played, that she was fully invested, but she was making the decisions. So she also owned her own evacuation. She owned her own rescue.
She wasn't a victim. She actually, you literally provided her everything she needed to save herself. Yep.
And that play came really, really critical at the, like on the 5-yard line, right before she was out.
How so?
Well, let me jump back. So one of the things that we had to do, and we had to have this, so she arrived in Kabul, and then she had to drive now another 8 hours to another city. And we had I was getting, again, this is where the whole network played a key role. I mean, we were getting real-time intel on, checkpoints. There were checkpoints between Kabul and this place, what we'll call Erewhon. For lack of a better term,
For anyone listening, Erewhon is actually nowhere, spelt backwards. We use it in the FBI for our fictional towns all the time. Go ahead.
So this is a very real place, but operations are still being run out of there every once in a while. But so to get her Erewhon, interestingly, the checkpoint, this is where the strategy played itself out, and I was getting reconfirmations that this is the right way to go. The checkpoints were only being checked from Erewhon to Kabul. The Taliban was not checking people Kabul to Erewhon. So the focus on Kabul again played to our advantage.
Right.
I mean, I feel horrible for all the people there and all the misery and problems, and obviously the bombing, the suicide bombing, and the 13 members of the U.S. military that were killed, as well as all the Afghan families and children. It was just a horrible situation. But for us, going north, actually kind of going northwest, was a very positive direction for us to go to Erewhon. It was a small airport.
Right.
Amongst that trip, I had to build a new network because now we had to find her a safe house. Again, this was a relatively small city, and so we had to find a safe house in the city, and through a variety of contacts in the field, and through one of my team members, she had a contact in this small city that had a family member who had a cousin who had a place that we can kind of make a hide spot for her while the flight got ready. The flight got ready. We had 2 mistries, and then again, I was constantly giving her encouragement, constantly validating her that she can do this. She needs to be cool and stay smart, that this is going to work, and that everybody was working for her. I think that's another key element that made the success so successful, is in terms of the building trust and building rapport, is that we made it all about her.
Yeah.
At one point during the trip from Kabul to Erewhon, she asked about, who else am I traveling with? And I said, I don't know. I go, my focus is only on you. We are focusing 100% on getting you out of Afghanistan. And you can just feel it sometimes in people's wording. That's when I felt that we were completely linked at that point.
Right.
I'll say I was probably about hour 4 into the ride from Kabul to Erewhon, is that now we had a strong personal connection. I think we had a strong trust relationship, because she felt not only was she making all the decisions, this team of 3 people, and there's another team that that they're coordinating with, were 100% invested in her rescue, that we wanted to see her get out safely.
Just logistically, I watch a lot of reality TV, and this is the most compelling reality show I've ever seen in my entire life. Logistically, how did she keep, like, I'm just making a guess, she was texting through a cell phone or something like that. How does she keep it charged? That must have been a challenge.
So she charged it in the car, and she brought a charger. That was actually one of the things that we covered early on. So we actually covered that as well, kind of operational security. So she was constantly deleting messages as well. She was always keeping her phone charged. That's really interesting. You're the only person that's ever asked me that. And that was like a small detail that before
it's a huge detail. It's communications. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's a center source, and I'd even forgot about that myself. That's one of the things we covered before she got on the bus.
Yeah, I mean, I that would have been my first concern is, you're in, a lot of third world kind of places, trying first worlds beyond communications, you're going to need a way to keep comms up. And actually, last time we chatted, I thought about it. I didn't have a chance to ask you. But I was curious about that, because that's real world kind of challenges as well.
And we actually had to bring a backup phone as well, just in case something went wrong with that. Because, I mean, if for some reason she loses the phone, drops the phone, breaks the phone, whatever the case may be,
have backup.
We have no communication. I mean, then she's on her own, 100% on her own.
Well, good. Keep going. Anyway, sorry to digress with that one. I was just
it's really interesting. I have not thought about that for about 6 months, and I remember thinking, what are all the things that could go wrong? I'm like, battery dies, phone stolen, phone broken. I'm like, we need another phone and we need a power source.
Right.
And so she covered that. Actually, she was ahead of us on that one too. And she was very wily young woman. She was really, really smart, street smart. That she had already had a backup phone and a charger with her.
Oh, good.
And apparently on the bus you can charge as well. But she had already thought about that. But that was obviously a big chief concern of mine early on, because that, everything falls apart on that.
Yeah.
So we got her into Erewhon, and then the call came, and she was moving out to this small airport, and I learned a cultural lesson that I had not thought about before, much to my disappointment myself. But when she went into the airport, so things were going up really, really fast. Things were moving very, very fast. The bus driver or the shuttle driver who picked her up had some information for her. And so I'm communicating with L real time, really, really fast. And now with M, because he said, you need to tell them X, and it didn't sound right to me. And so he said, you need to tell them you're going to Kabul. And I'm like, this sounds crazy to me. And so, but it was right. The shuttle driver, he was in on the operation. But communication was going very, very quickly. And this was like 4 days on 4 hours sleep now. So, I mean, I did not plan that well at all. I was absolutely wiped out. And
it definitely affects our decision-making process.
Yeah, it was hard. I mean, fortunately it worked out, but yeah, I mean, I was struggling, and it got harder and harder. Like I said, I did not plan. I planned well for her to get to the end. I did not plan well for myself to be a good support to her to get to the end.
Yeah.
So when she went to the airport, the men went off to one side and the women went off to another side. So now she's a part of a group, and I did not factor that in. And so she's like, I'm going through security. And as she went through security, I get a message 10 minutes later. She says, I'm lost. And so she's lost in the airport, an airport full of Taliban fighters, and she's a single woman. And so this is an incredibly dangerous situation.
Sure.
Fortunately, she was very, very calm about the whole thing. She says, I'm keeping calm. I'm staying smart. I'm keeping cool. I'm staying smart. She started to repeat back the kind of phraseology we had used throughout, and again, the kind of the congruent phraseology that we had used to build comfort, familiarity. And I'm like, look, just find a family to connect with, a family that looks familiar. And so she found a family to connect with, because we did not want her walking around as a single woman, because if anybody stops her, then she's got really big problems.
Right.
And so she found a family that she connected with, and she's like, I'm good. And our flight's going to board in an hour. I get a text message 20 minutes later, I'm lost again, which at this point I'm like going, oh my God, you're killing me. I'm like, whatever you're doing, stop doing that.
Right.
And I'm like, find another family. I go, tell them your situation and do not leave their side under any circumstances. She said, I got another text back 5 minutes later saying she found another family. She explained to them they understand, and she's going to walk with them the entire time. She's not going to leave their side. Then on 4:25 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on August 30th, I got a photo of her on the airplane, and they were taking off, and she was free.
Oh, what a sense of relief that must have been.
It was huge. It was.
But it didn't stop there, did it?
No. Then I got her parents out and 41 other people, including, I should say, I helped with a much larger team. That's a much more accurate way to put it.
Right.
I got her parents out and 41 other people, including one American family.
Wow. What did you learn from the first that made it, obviously, you know, the great sense of accomplishment obviously drove you to keep doing it because you're making such a difference. Did you know, what were some of the key things you learned, you know, from M that you're able to bring forward and, you know, most likely be more effective with everyone else since?
So I think one of the key things, this is where I worked with a number of really phenomenal groups that were doing the evacuations, but some of the challenges that they were having is, you know, going back to the Harmon and Harmon article, is that communication has to be consistent. You can't have long delays of communication. I would even go back to, so now I went from, I was like, this was amazing. I was like, and circumstance after M, and I'm like, who else needs help? She gave me a list of like 9 families, and I'm like, okay. And so we started working on them. And one of the things, and it was my frustration working with one of the groups. I mean, and this was just a small frustration. They were a phenomenal group to work with, but their communication was really inconsistent, which made it very hard. And right. So I would, if I had nothing to say to this group, I would tell them, I've got no updates. And I would check in, how's everybody doing? Does anybody need anything? There was, you know, we had one man and his family, his wife was pregnant. He had a 3-year-old daughter. And they were literally on the run. The Taliban was calling him on his mobile phone, telling him, when we find you, we're going to behead you in front of your family. And wow. So him, I had to check in with all the time because he was, and he goes back to, and so each family, honestly, I think I engaged differently. And him, again, a technique that I learned from you about goals, you know, what is your goal? And does this help or hinder your goal? Because he wanted to do some overland pilot, you know, trips that we were looking on and getting people out overland into neighboring countries that were very risky and very, due to the risk, were very dangerous. And I'm like, you have a pregnant wife, a young daughter. I go, is this in line with this? He's like, let's do that one. I want to do that one. I want to be a part of the pilot group. And this always brought him back into focus. Right. And the beauty is him and M and 40, you know, again, 37 others was it was a family of American family of 4 that got back to the U.S. They're all safely now in Europe. Just keeping everybody focused. But even if they heard from you and you told them that you were working for them, and you didn't have any updates, I just felt that they had trust the entire time. Right. And so that was really, I think, a key thing of consistent communication, that the communication was credible and was congruent.
Presence goes a long way, and presence can be virtual presence as well. Just knowing that you're there, knowing that you're paying attention, that you haven't forgotten them. It's, you know, again, what you did to provide that psychological comfort that people need to get those shields down was remarkable. So, you know, what's next? I mean, where do you go from there? You saved the world.
I don't know. It's opened up kind of a new, interesting area of thinking. I mean, I just feel really grateful to be a part of this opportunity and to be able to help people. And again, I mean, these families, I mean, whatever I did, they did 1,000 times more. I mean, these families were so incredibly brave, and they moved. I mean, and to leave your whole entire life behind you is I can't even fathom that. Yeah. But they were so strong and so brave, and I was just really honored that they saw me as a valuable resource. And I was just the generosity and the kindness of other people who were actually mounting up the flights. Like groups like Mercury One is another one. I mean, that were mounting these flights and helping people get out of the country was really just a beautiful humanitarian movement.
I'm kind of a glass, as everyone that does know me knows me to be a glass half full kind of guy. And the way I see the world is, without these kind of challenges wouldn't give us context to appreciate when things go well. We wouldn't know how awesome things are unless we saw horrible things. Yeah. And this example that you gave, like you said, you had lost faith in humanity to some degree. From what we see and what networks put on the news cycle. Doesn't matter what side the news cycle you listen to is on. Remember, advertisers are paying for viewers, and so they're going to sensationalize stuff, and you're going to see the horrendousness because it's like watching a car wreck. People just want to watch car wrecks. Yeah. But if you didn't watch a car wreck, you're not going to be able to understand and appreciate the beauty that you actually just were able to accomplish, and the outpouring of humanity to take care of fellow man. Like you said, just be your brother's keeper.
Yeah, absolutely. Love thy neighbor. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that you were able to get all these people together. Grant, and I know you played a role, and you downplay that some, but again, you were the orchestra leader. You assembled a band and a full set orchestra, and you kept bringing in more instruments, but you were the conductor that made it all happen. And the end result was, and still remains, quite remarkable and quite inspiring. I, for my very, very small part in it, for those that don't know, Keith had reached out to me before this even happened, and we were chatting about, trust and rapport building everything. And I had wanted to have him on my show, and he says, "Can't, I'm in the middle of something really big right now." Because we were going to do training for your organization, that Keith's part of, that had nothing to do with this whatsoever. I'm not quite understanding all that's going on, but he said, "I'll tell you about it once it's all over." And I was like, oh my gosh, when he actually did, I was flabbergasted that and honored that I played the maybe one or two nuggets of information that I was able to do, played a small part in it too. But I feel honored.
No, actually, I mean, you played a really big role in it, and everybody, and like I had one friend, the original private military contractor that I talked with, and the former NSA officer that I talked with, as well, and I went, when this all happened, I said, I came back to him and said, "Look, this is how it successfully rolled out, and I just want to say thank you so much." And like the guy who was a private military, he goes, "Look, I didn't do anything." I go, "First of all, you gave me encouragement, and you cared, and you put me in contact with one person, and that was like a tectonic shift. I had nothing, and then I had one. Right. And you gave me a methodology by which to work in, or which to work under, and to rely on. I mean, again, some of these skills I think I had from my partnership work, but you put a name to them, and when you put a name to something, it makes it really a lot easier to execute and
repeatable, yeah,
and to repeat as well. And so I, when in doubt, I sought her thoughts and opinions. I spoke in terms of her priorities. I validated her, and I gave her options. And literally, when I didn't know what to do, that's what I did.
Yeah.
And that's what I did with every single person, as well as with the network as well. I mean, I constantly focused on them. There's no shortage of takers in life, and I wanted to be a giver. And so in every way, I practiced the exact same thing. I would, ask about their people. I would check in. When I had nothing, I would just reach out and say, "Have you had any success getting your people out?" And even after M got out, I still checked in with them.
Good.
It wasn't just transactional. I was really invested in helping them be successful. And I would always ask them, "Is there anything I can do to help?"
And for those that y'all are listening, Keith went through what I call the 4 pillars of communication. It's what makes it repeatable for me, and for obviously what Keith took to a level that I've never seen before. And it actually literally shifts the focus, because everyone says you got to make it about everyone else. You got to, just shift that focus to other people. But those are nice words, but how exactly do you do that? And exactly what Keith said, I'm going to repeat them for everyone again right now, so you can actually put these down and use these in every aspect of your life, because these simple 4 things are literally the bedrock to building the trust you need, to building those partnerships, to making that connection and never being alone. Because when people feel, and actually their brain's rewarding them for this interaction, you can really achieve anything, like Keith just explained. And that is, number one, seek the thoughts and opinions of others instead of sharing your own. Two, talk in terms of their priorities and challenges instead of yours. Three, you validate them non-judgmentally with non-judgmental curiosity to understand them, their situation, and their context, basically empathy from their point of view. And four, which he did constantly throughout this entire thing, and empower people with choices. Because when you do one of those four things, the entire shift goes from you to them. It moves beyond that transactional relationship and moves into the long-term relationship. And when you demonstrate, as Keith is saying, congruency between verbals and nonverbal behavior and consistency, you're someone that is now trustworthy, because they could trust what Keith is going to do every single step of the way, whether he had information or not. Consistency and congruence between, I'm going to reach out and keep checking in, I'm going to throw another little nugget that you did, because you said you interacted with everyone a little bit differently. Keith did something called situational leadership. Everyone needs to be dealt with. Everyone needs different psychological comfort for whatever their own situation. And so Keith was constantly reading what each individual needed in every moment, and then became consistent for what they needed. That is the ultimate for making a connection with a human being, is what Keith demonstrated. And the dividends is what? You save lives. Nothing could be more impactful than that. Well, did I miss anything? Keith, did I miss anything that you'd like to share as words of inspiration for anyone else that wants to follow in your footsteps and maybe save a few people in life without title and position, which is so cool. You did it without any title and position.
That's a really interesting point, because I think, so I read an article about perceived leadership and real leadership, is that people think, oh, just because someone has a title of vice president, president, that they are a leader. But real leadership is the people that go to when people want information, want access, want leverage, want success. And so, not always the person with the most stripes or the most or the highest level of authority within an organization is in fact the true leader. And so, I honestly don't think leadership is, you are not promoted to leadership. Leadership is a behavior.
Yes.
Because I've seen some of just amazing leaders really far down the organization or far down on the team, or it comes from, oftentimes, I think, some of the most unexpected people is where leadership is actually found. And you see a lot of management the higher you go up in an organization. There's leadership there too. It's obviously context specific, but just a job title does not necessarily translate directly to leadership.
And you just demonstrated that the highest levels of a human endeavor. Keith, if people want to find out more about you or reach out to you in any way, I know you don't have the kind of presence because this is not your job. So it's not like you have a website. Hey, you want to save people in the world? Just reach out to Keith on his website. Is there a way that you'd be open to having people reach out to you if they have questions, follow up, or maybe a problem that they are looking for guidance to solve in their lives?
Yeah, if they could, if anybody would like any help on, building strategic partnerships, or, in any way, if anything that I said resonates with them and they'd like to talk about more and have more information on, I've got an email address that they can use. Is Keith Kall, KeithKall, @gmail.com.
There you go, Keith. And I'm going to put links through my website and through this podcast as well. So if you want to reach out to Keith through me, you can do that as well. And with that, I thank you. Go ahead.
Before we you had a week to think about it. How would you engage in something like this? Is there anything that you would have done differently, or if there's anything that you would have, if, as you thought about it, even preparing for the podcast, you kind of put yourself in the situation. Is there any? You're obviously an expert of, 20 plus years in doing work like this. What would you have done in that circumstance?
Again, you asked me that last time, and I haven't really changed my mind on that, because I think you executed everything exceptionally well, because you took one of the four, pillars of communication, the empowerment with choice, and made that the forefront. Probably what I would do at this point, probably after the first thing I would have done with them, is I'd start, SOPs and standard operating procedures basically are a great way to codify as a starting point. And I probably would have started codifying what I was doing in writing for a direction to start moving in, so you could actually make it a little bit more repeatable for your team members. But when it came to the execution itself from the get-go, I can't think of anything I would do differently. I mean, hindsight is always 2020, but because what's the end result? It worked, and you solved the greatest challenge and greatest problem. I mean, if anything went sideways, well, then we do a postmortem on that. But there was nothing went sideways from the optic I had. Again, I don't have all the nooks and crannies and details because we're protecting the names of the innocent. Only you can do that. But when it came to the execution of you knew your why, you communicated that why, and then you strategized the what and the how, basically the means, goals to the end. And you were consistent with that transparency. What you demonstrated was it's not complicated. You took what a lot of people would overcomplicate, governments overcomplicate, organizations overcomplicate. Remember, people that overcomplicate things or make them seem really complicated means that they don't really understand the problem, or they don't understand how to solve the problem, because most things in life are not complicated if you understand it at a deep level. If you understand communication and what it means to communicate and build a connection and partnerships like you do with another human being, it's really simple. It's easy. Make it about them. People overcomplicate how to do that. No, how do you do that? Those 4 things. You executed only 1 to 2 of those 4 things because you don't need all 4. You empowered with choice, and then you were consistent to build trust. That's it. It's really that. And you demonstrated transparency. These are not hard things. People overcomplicate things. And so my hat's off to you. You demonstrated life is not hard if you open up your eyes and you think. Like you said, make good choices, think, and and just don't be the victim. Take charge yourself. I'm going to give you all the information that I have. I'm going to be transparent, but it's up to you to make the move forward. And so basically you were leading at that high level as well. You gave the mission statement, and then you empowered someone with how to execute. That's what leaders do. That's what the greatest leaders on this planet do, have done, and always will do. Good on you.
That's fascinating. Thank you. It's really fascinating.
All right, Keith, I can't thank you enough again. And I can't wait to see what adventures that we'll hopefully do together sometime.
I look forward to it. It's been really delightful to be on here. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate, again, your encouragement and just your interest in this topic. So thanks so much, Robin. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.